now come to our panel discussion. So the panel discussion, we will talk about the industry insights about privilege access management, privilege identity management. So we will have a Bryan from Microsoft join again, Brett from Delinea join again. And we will also very pleased to have a Jim Walker from Royal Bank of Canada to join. And Jim is the Director of Identity and Access Management Architecture at Royal Bank of Canada. Purpose of panel, just like Brett said, we want to give you different perspectives. Because you hear the talk from Microsoft, from Delinea, we also want to bring from the user side, from the different practitioner side, so how things really work in this. Because one single area cannot address everything, right? So you have to put not only technology, but also people, like a policy, admin, process, all things together. So that's the purpose for the panel discussion. Let's do a quick self-introduction. Jim, can you give us a quick self-introduction?
Sure thing. I'm Jim Walker again. I've been working in IT for 34 years now, and in a security function for probably 25 of that 34 years. I've worked on pretty much all facets of security, whether it's infrastructure, networks, logical and physical. Finally moving into architecture, where where you're starting to design solutions that meet those particular verticals. Excellent. And now I'm at Royal Bank.
Wonderful. Jim actually is an expert in all those identity-related architecture, so have years of industry events, and let's see the evolution of all those solutions. So glad to have you here. All right, Bryan, thanks. You want to give a quick self-introduction?
Yeah, sure. So Bryan Baldock, I've been a consultant, I've been a system administrator, I've been a engineer within Microsoft, working with the different technologies on Microsoft side of the house, and now I'm a program manager working in Fast Track. So had an interesting career so far. Don't have as many years under the belt as the gentleman I'm joined by, but looking forward to hearing their take on these solutions as well.
Be happy about that, Bryan. That's not a bad thing.
All right. So, Brett, you want to give your version?
I'm Brett Jones. I'm a senior sales engineer. I've been at Psychotic for close to 4 years. I talk to people all the time about privilege and PAM. And the thing I'm talking to people about right now is cyber insurance. My cyber insurance called me and they told me, hey, we're not going to renew your cyber insurance if you don't have a PAM product and you don't have MFA. And I've been handling those calls for the past year. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, so oftentimes you have to have some regulation or have some like a mandatory things to really drive all this practice.
Yeah, it used to be regulations, but this year it's definitely cyber insurance. I've handled that call a million times now.
Cool. All right. Okay, so let's start our panel discussion. Of course, we also encourage people online to submit your questions. We will incorporate your question to ask our panelists as well. All right, so my first question for all our panel members is really back to the basics, back to the concept of privilege. It doesn't matter if it's a privilege identity management or access management, because sometimes there overlap, sometimes a little bit confusion, right? So privilege identity access and privilege access management, identity and access management. So I want to convert that question a little bit. Instead of ask what is or what are those things, I want to ask, what is the biggest misconception you have heard or you experienced related to privilege management? What's not, or something really it's not about this?
For me, it usually winds up being sort of on the PAM space, it usually is, okay, I have all my credentials vaulted, I'm good now, right? And it's not. It's those steps you take afterwards, beyond just vaulting credentials, right? And it's good to take the first step, but it's important that you continue the journey to mature your practice, whether that is bringing in analytics. There's always sort of another step that you can go to really bring your maturity to a higher level, is what I see.
All right, very good. And a part of your presentation also mentioned that, right? So vaulting is only one component of the whole process. So you have a other thing. You cannot just do one thing. I'm good. That's it, right? So
Yeah, and Jim, I would assume you see that over at Royal Bank of Canada. That really it's a journey, right?
excellent.
Absolutely. So I would think one of the basic misconception is there isn't a starting point. So again, you talked about accounts just being in a vault, but there's a previous step where you've identified them, you've classified them, you found an owner. That's where, the tools don't always help. You have to, build ancillary processes and actually tools to manage the ownership and all those approvals that go along with it. And then you get the accounts in the vault after that. And then, as you say, afterwards, there's all the other stuff that goes along with it, whether that's auditing and reporting, whether that's attestation of use. A lot of the products that are out there in the industry don't have that built in. I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of the capabilities of your products. So very exciting.
Yeah, it's a real program and a real journey, like you said, and it starts sort of way before you get the vault. It starts with trying to identify what you need to be looking at with privilege, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Bryan, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd have to say that I really like the perspective that they brought to the discussion, Brett and James just now, because the way that Microsoft is approaching uh, the privileged access management and privileged identity management is by a vast array of different products. However, the main concentration that we're focusing on is identity being the control plane, right? So if everything is coming through this one point, then you can ensure and audit and validate what is going on with that identity afterwards. So if instead of looking at the old mentality where we've got our perimeter and then we've got our firewall in place, we've got all our stuff sitting behind the fire, that doesn't exist anymore. We've got devices all over the place that are sitting on your personal device. Your user might be a guest account in a Microsoft.com or an Outlook.com or Hotmail.com or Gmail or whatever account coming into your tenancy to access specific information. And yeah, I am kind of focused on the cloud aspect of this, right? Where we can integrate with third-party applications like Brett had mentioned, where we can also integrate with SAML. So anything that supports SAML can use Azure AD as the gateway, essentially, right? So considering identity as the control plane for digital transformation and then taking that as your first step, the foundation level, is really the essential. And what's beautiful about that is that no organization is too small to do it, right? We all know that SMBs nowadays are 60% vulnerable towards cybercrime. Like most cybercrime is happening in SMBs. You don't have to be a gigantic organization to start taking advantage of this. It's just getting the right tools in place, essentially.
One of the really nice things is the interoperability, right? There's a lot of protocols that we can all support, like SAML, but then there's also one of the really nice things about dealing with Microsoft is there's so many commandlets in PowerShell now that I can manipulate things in the cloud via a system like mine, right? As long as it's open and extensible, I'm able to be able to use a commandlet to control some of the PIM functionality from outside, and I think that that's really cool. That we've been trying to get there for a lot of years. That all these things can interact together, and I think it's cool that we've made some progress.
Yeah, definitely. And the REST API, I mean, the command lists are just one way to access the REST API on the back end. I mean, everything's built off of, the RESTful API and then REST API with Azure AD, with Azure, with, all these different systems. And now with the introduction of Cloud Docs, which is coming out, where we can actually monitor and secure identities across, the different clouds. So have that centralized solution. It's really getting interesting. And I mean, the adoption, the idea behind it, and Brett, you've got to see that too with people you're talking to. Just the amount of questions coming in about what do I do with my bring your own devices? Everybody's starting to ask that now. We can't, with the work from home and everything that changed during the pandemic. This is just such a recurring theme that everybody's dealing with the same issues right now.
So, gentlemen, you guys actually touch on a very important topic as my next questions. So the evolution of identity, privilege identity. My question is, why is PIM or privilege identity access management is so important to today's cybersecurity landscape? So because we encounter a lot of changes in the past 2 years, right? So all those things. So what do you observe the major change in the cybersecurity landscape in the past 2 years, then which emphasize why PIM or privilege identity is so important? Can you share some
I think Bryan hit on it earlier whenever he said, you know, we don't have a castle and moat anymore, right? The castle wall's been torn down, right? You know, whenever you look at it, identity really is the perimeter. And that's the kind of thing you were talking about, right, Bryan?
Yeah, no, exactly. So the castle and moat mentality is it's more and more difficult nowadays to utilize that, just with the evolution of technology and just with the evolution of how things are going. I mean, look at the start of the pandemic, right? Everybody is like, we don't have laptops. We need laptops. And then what happens? Well, there's no more laptops left. And so people are trying to figure out how they can, you know, connect into their office, and VPN solutions are exploding and everything like that. And so the idea behind it is figuring out a way that we can secure and monitor and audit these accesses through PIM or PAM or, you know, solutions like that, while not reducing the efficacy of our workers, right? So that they can continue to work properly and work effectively without having to jump through hoops necessarily.
So true. Jim, what do you observe like the industry change?
Well, absolutely. Like, as from the time that I started in the industry till even like, you know, 10 years ago till now is drastically different. The number of identities has expanded exponentially, and they're in so many different places. They're so hard to track and keep control of. Businesses can create them, like business units, where it all used to be controlled by IT. Now it's being controlled by the businesses. And those individual identities create risk for the organization. And in a regulated, risk-averse organization that's very concerned about brand and keeping our customers safe and their assets safe, you know, there's the real concern is you know, managing those identities. As Bryan indicated, that is the boundary right now. It's the identity. So they start from there and they spread out all over, you know, SaaS and cloud environments. And then how does the organization keep control of those and manage the risks that they pose?
I think those SaaS applications and those SaaS identities really get overlooked a lot, right? Anybody in the marketing department can go and sort of make a Twitter account and link it to the whatever, right? And all those applications that we sort of don't think about as being privileged the way that we used to think about privilege, right? Man, someone posts the wrong thing on your Facebook account, you're dead nowadays.
Yeah, that is so accurate. And you know, using Azure AD as an example, as that gateway to identity, allows us to trim back, you know, the fat of all these SaaS applications that people are signing up for. And as long as it's attached to the identity that we're protecting through our tenancy, prevent it from happening, or at least have visibility into what they're doing through, you know, a cloud app security broker or something like that. And, you know, the kind of, we're getting into these are the type of topics I love talking about when it comes to, you know, Azure AD and stuff like that. But I think we might have got a little sidetracked from the actual, you know, PIM discussion, but I think it all ties into this whole, you know, concept of zero trust, right? And Brett, you touched on it so well during your presentation, and you know, it's Microsoft's stance, and I think a lot of organizations and Jim, I'm guessing you're going the same direction as well with RBC, is that whole zero trust mentality, right? We've got to know who the person is, validate who they are, who they say they are, and then, you know, remove that access when they're done with it.
Right. Yeah.
Part of the reason why this topic's so interesting is because it's not completely solved yet, right? Nobody has a complete handle on it yet. It's still sort of being solved, and I think that's what makes it interesting. When you brought up the CASB solutions, right? I think there's really still emerging markets there in how do we get hold of all these identities and control them.
Yeah.
And I hear yes, the industry changed so fast, right? So there's new things pop up, the challenges, and then the solution need to catch up. May not be just the technology itself, but also the model, principles, the way we are doing things, like zero trust, right? So we actually have a zero trust architecture virtual event next month at Cyber Tech and Risk. And the PIM, or privileged identity, it's a kind of a foundation, the major pillar of all those security models. All right, so
zero trust isn't something you can buy, is it? It's a mindset, is what we always
model,
say, right?
So it's the way or mentality.
Exactly.
All right. And okay, so back to the privilege identity. So we talk about privilege identity. Bryan and Brett talk quite many areas in their presentation. So for here, I want to ask our panelists, if a company want to implement PIM, may not be like it could be a large organization, or could be a startup, or could be a small business. So what are some key considerations? So in the privileged identity or access management. So Jim, you want to start or?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. So from an organization perspective, and we're a big organization, some of the key considerations are always, as Brad indicated, at the tail end of this, there's going to be a lot of data that's associated with auditing. And what are you going to do with all that data? As an organization that's regulated, we have to store that data for a period of time in order to be able to provide it to external regulators and audit for forensics investigations. So again, storing all that data has costs, right? So managing that. Some of the other considerations are things like organizations that have been around for a while have a legacy of identities, whether they're in the cloud or whether on-prem, they're there. And if you're just starting out, you've got to go and do an inventory and figure out who owns those and who can approve the removal or the additional access. That can be a very daunting task. And a lot of the vendors provide some capabilities around identifying them and finding them, which is great, but it doesn't solve the whole picture, right? And then again, some other considerations are picking your tools. What capabilities do you want to introduce? You're not going to be able to do it all at once. And as Brett indicated, you can't buy zero trust. So how are you going to design for zero trust? It's not just a mindset, it's a design pattern. And again, some of the cloud providers provide you that capability to implement that easily, but you've got a whole legacy in your on-prem solutions. So how do you get there? Again, it's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey, definitely. Yeah, very good at the consideration. Actually, I really like what you put, Jim, is start with your data. You start with what you have, right? So before you even looking at vendor solutions, well, you need to understand what you have. What's the uniqueness about your user identity? And back to, I think, remember at Bryan's presentation, you need to know your stakeholders, who in charge of those data, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So other people, you want to share your thoughts about the considerations?
Well, I'd say Jim really hit the nail on the head. Hit the head on the nail. I'm sorry, lacking of sleep here. Anyways, I'd say, what Jim said was perfect. It's absolutely knowing the stakeholders, knowing who owns the application, what you actually have. If you don't understand what you have, you don't know how to protect it. And if you don't have anything in place that can actually tell you what you have, then you have to figure out how to find out what you have, right? So there's this whole crawl, walk, run approach that you can take to it. And I'm trying to be vague and not try to tie this into, Microsoft products necessarily, because not everyone will have, Azure AD P2 or Microsoft 365 E5 to take advantage of these tools that are kind of built into the platform to do this. But for those that do, that they're really helpful. And like Jim said, there's, cloud providers, we have a way, because you're coming onto this platform, to simplify that whole MFA process or that whole zero trust process, because as you're onboarding, you're already moving stuff. So you have to kind of understand what it is as you're moving it and then figure out how to protect it, right? But that whole legacy side is a bit more difficult to approach. And it's a problem. It's a problem that a lot of vendors are working with. And there are some tools within Azure AD that are able to relate back to on-premise applications like Azure AD app proxies or things like that, where you can, again, centralize your identity in Azure AD and then have that kind of branching out and getting to all these other applications. But again, it's a journey. I mean, that's probably the best way to say it.
Excellent. What is from there,
We
Brad?
talked a little bit about the speed of change, which I think is interesting, right? Is my tool going to be able to keep up with me in 3 years or 5 years, right? Like right now, a lot of people I talk to, they're still just getting a hand on their human identities. They know they're going to need to address their programmatic identities at some point, but most of them haven't really taken that step yet. And I think that it's important to know, hold on, there's a tool that I choose. Is it going to be able to make that next step with me? Is it going to be able to handle my programmatic identities? Is it going to be able to go out and find those things further on in the future? And I think that that's a really interesting point, because none of us know exactly what the landscape of IT is going to look like in 5 years.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we talk about some key considerations from understand your data to also understand the solution, understand your needs, understand the future. And so when you start to implement your privilege management or identity management or access management, what do you normally kind of common challenges you probably will encounter, and how do you deal with that? So this is really about like a best practice within implementing privilege management. Anyone want to share your insights?
I would say that I do have somebody I work with, and his line that he always uses is, "Hey, you may be buying a piece of software, but you're trying to implement behavioral change at your company, right?" And so it's a lot about having some top-down structure into what we're going to do. This is why you're going to do it, and then it's being able to do things like slowly walk people into getting used to how the system works before you just yank the rug out from under them and say, "You can't see a password anymore." It's not about that. That would be a horrible idea, and you would lose everyone's trust if you tried to do something like that. So a lot of it's about thinking through the program, having top-down sponsorship, and really thinking through that crawl, walk, run that Bryan just mentioned a few minutes ago.
So it's like a program management thing, right? So it's not just one job. You have a holistic way you need to program.
Putting in software is the easy part. You know that. I mean, we all know that, right? The piece of software isn't the interesting part of it. The interesting part of it is changing the way that people access things and changing their attitudes towards privilege.
Behavior change is very difficult.
I also think that you have to understand how they're using these accounts and identities so that you can adapt your service to suit them, because it's not a one-size-fits-all world. So if you understand how they're using them, you can design your service around, maximizing the control, but minimizing the friction. And again, there's a lot of great products out there. There's a lot of great capabilities out there, Azure AD with federation, et cetera, that organizations can leverage to help accelerate. But again, understanding that, how they're using it and adapting your service to that. And then I guess another one of the challenges for me is that the cloud approaches don't apply well on-prem and vice versa. So you're always going to have to maintain this balance, let's call it, or different services in the cloud than you are on-prem. And so recognizing that is important as well, so you can adapt and accommodate for it.
All right. Bryan, you have anything to add to the challenges part?
Honestly, those were exactly the same points I would have made. Implementing the technology, change management, behavioral changes. Just to reiterate on what Brett has said and what Jim had said, it's exactly the same points that I would have mentioned as well. Definitely.
Excellent. We got a consensus.
Cool.
Oh
yeah,
I didn't mess that one up. That's great. Thank you, Bryan.
It's for sure a consensus on that one.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's say we start to implement and work on that, all the things we follow the industry best practice or tailored to your business. So how do you measure the success of privilege identity management or privilege access management? How do we know it's a success? Or normally it's any KPI or any metrics. So how do you, when you report to your management, how can we make sure it is a good implementation?
Yeah, so for me, it would be if you've already done the cataloging of these identities and their access, a good KPI is, the adoption. So you know who's using the capabilities and who's not. And so you can easily report that to senior executives so that they can see the adoption. And I can also see the orphans so they understand those are risk and what we need to focus on. Because you can't do it all at once.
A lot of times in a PAM system, people will come to a PAM system because they're trying to reduce their attack surface, right? And a way that they're doing that is they're getting rid of everyone's domain admin accounts, making them come and check out a domain admin account when it's needed. So for us, a lot of times it's, were we able to reduce the number of privileged accounts being used in an environment? Were we able to help people get a handle on that, right? Bring them all into one umbrella and then slowly start to whittle away at them.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, and removing their standing access as well, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And I'd have to say that's spot on. I mean, through the quick demo that I was running through during my presentation, I touched on that, the whole discovery and insights portion, right? The more insights a tool can offer you, the more reporting you can provide to senior executives, the easier it is to see that KPI in action.
Excellent. The visibility to various stakeholders. Okay, wonderful. We do have a couple of audience questions here. I just want to bring that to our panelist. I think Denise.
Find us some softballs, Bryan.
I think Denise asked, is that Denise? Yeah, ask, how can we help business users to educate? So basically, to educate the evolution of PAM. So, because when you work on that for people may not be in cybersecurity field or like IT field, how do you educate them about the importance of a PAM or PIM?
Well, the approach that, is often used as scare tactics, but that's not the best way to approach it. We try to point out the value of reducing the attack surface, as Brett had indicated, controlling who has access, making sure that any action that's used by that access, whether it's a role or an identity, is approved, and they can see how their risk posture is improving. And then we also point out that if they use our services, if you watched Brett's demo, it becomes a better experience for the user. They don't have to remember passwords. They're not writing them down. They're not, creating more problems from a risk perspective by doing that. So again, you sell the features about controlling risk and making it easier for the user.
So make them job also need to be easier rather than just to add a lot of roadblocks to them. So that's
we've got a browser plugin called a web password filler. That web password filler can go and fill the sites on a lot of the SaaS applications they use. but it can also generate a strong password for them. We want to get them out of the habit of, reusing their password or using green car or whatever. We want to get rid of that. We want to start using generated passwords that fit a certain complexity that are created automatically by the system. And we have easy ways to do that, right? We want them to start understanding, I probably shouldn't be reusing my Wells Fargo password here, right? That's probably not a good idea. And I think that people are smart. If you give them the tools, people are smart enough to go and understand what you're talking about. Everybody deals with technology nowadays, not just the three of us, right?
Yep. Yeah, and the whole passwordless movement is huge at the moment too, right? Getting rid of the concept that weak link, which is the password in itself, right? And just think about it. The word password is a horrible concept that should have never existed in the first place. But we didn't have anything better, right? So changing the game with passwordless and making it even more seamless and secure is really a primary focus at the moment to get to that zero trust building block, right? It's starting at the foundation and working up to the ability to actually get rid of those passwords eventually, or utilize a product that can assist with verifying credentials and things like that.
Right. Passwordless is another trend for the identity management. Speaking of the industry trends, gentlemen, I'd like to ask you, what do you see the PIM or privilege identity or access management is going in the next maybe a year or 2 years? So can you predict a little bit future based on what's going on here? What kind of things we need to pay attention to?
Now, for me, there's a focus on the workstation. There's a focus on which applications can users run, which applications are they allowed to elevate. So we've sort of gotten back away a little bit. People have already sort of taken care of the domain admin credentials. That they've kind of got a handle on. But right now, it's how do I prevent ransomware from encrypting all my boxes? What sort of technology is there that can go in there and really help me with this problem that everybody is currently susceptible to, right? How do I stop these gangs from coming in and holding me hostage? And for us, that appears to be really a focus on the workstation. And the workstations can be the Wild West a little bit. A lot of people don't even know what's installed across their user base. Mm-hmm. And so it's trying to get a handle on that sort of thing right now in the bit that I'm working on.
So endpoint.
Yeah, and for me, the excitement are things like just-in-time privileges, as Bryan indicated earlier, that some of the cloud services offer temporary elevation of access, step-up authentication. These things have been around, but they really haven't been used a lot. And then again, passwordless is that actual building block for zero trust, where you can start moving in a different direction without passwords and for your organization.
I think the concept of ephemeral credentials is really interesting, right? Things with short time to live, so that I'm able to go and request something. It creates in the back end sort of an ephemeral credential. I use it, and then by itself, it sort of goes away, so that nobody has to do anything with it. It's just gone at that point.
Yeah, very interesting. But again, it creates that audit problem, right? Or challenge. Let's call it a challenge. Or you've got to figure out who had that ephemeral access at the time.
All right.
But I'm more interested to hear where Bryan thinks it's going, because I might learn something about Microsoft that I don't know yet.
Honestly, I'd say, just reiterating on what I'd said earlier, right? Choosing a single point of access, choosing that perimeter, making identity itself the perimeter, and then protecting identity in ways that allow us to continue to increase the size of that perimeter from just the identity and then outwards, right? Like, what else can we tie into that? And there's a MSAL, which fits into Microsoft Authentication Library. So developers can even start taking advantage of Azure AD credentials to log into their own applications. We're seeing this more and more now. And cloud applications in themselves, right? We touched briefly on CASB, right? But cloud apps are huge and they're everywhere, and you'll see them. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, what is considered a cloud app? And Brett, you kind of touched on it, right? You go to a website and it says, do you want to sign in? Do you want to sign in with Google, Twitter, Microsoft, Facebook, all those options? That's all part of the cloud app scenario. And when you select to sign in with that, you're sharing information from another service to that cloud application. So it's how do we, from an enterprise standpoint, how do we keep an eye on that? How do we know what applications our users are using and how they're logging into these devices and how they're logging into these different applications, and ensuring that we're securing that or we're preventing access, especially when it comes to sensitive information that we need to protect. So yeah, CASB, verifiable credentials, and let's get rid of passwords, password lists all the way.
But where are you going to be moving the buttons and the ribbon in my Word? That's what I want to know. I can never find the italics.
We got to keep you on your toes, Brett.
Wonderful. All right, so we touch on the industry trends. Our last question I have for the panel, and also we usually have that question for almost all the panel discussion is regarding the people side. Because at the end of the day, we need to have the technology, process, and people work together. So we also observe from cyber tech risk, and everybody noticed, we are industry-wise, we lack a lot of cybersecurity professional, and specifically in identity management, access management, privilege management, we need a lot of talent, right? So this is the area we really want to pay attention to career development. So from your point of view, in this field, what are some key skills or capabilities we need for people who are interested in joining this field and to develop their career or advance their career? What do we need to pay attention to? Or put it another way, if you want to hire someone, what do they need to have? Maybe Jim, you start.
Yeah, so I think somebody coming up in the industry needs to focus on, first of all, the federation protocols that are in use today and how they're maturing. So they're very important, as Bryan indicated. You get to a website and you're being asked to authenticate to an identity provider somewhere else. And there's a whole interaction of the passing of identity information back and forth, and that's called federation. And so understanding how that all works is very important, because it's our day-to-day lives really within, especially the cloud. Understanding how APIs are consumed securely and developed securely is important. Understanding the capabilities of what the cloud service providers offer. Each one of them offer different capabilities, or offered in a different way. So understanding all those is quite important. Now, the beauty of it all is all these things are available, where in the old days you'd have to go to a library or get the manuals off of IBM. Today you can get yourself a subscription at Azure or AWS, and they're free. So make yourself use those free facilities for as long as you can, and learn as much as you can about it.
Very cool.
I'll share what my mentor told me when I asked him how he knew all the stuff that he knew. And he said, read every single thing you can. Read it all. And so I kind of started going down that road, and it really is, there's a lot of information out there. And Jim, I mean, I'm going to take that in consideration, definitely what you said, but understanding, federation, and understanding how even older authentication platforms function, even if it's just Active Directory. I mean, you can get a trial license for a Windows Server, deploy Active Directory, and start playing with it right away. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing it other than just taking the time to do it. So having that willingness to actually get out there and try to break stuff, just don't break anything in production.
And being responsible for your own learning. That's the other thing, right? So don't always expect the company to provide that for you. You actually have a responsibility yourself.
I think it's a DevOps world and a cloud world, and I agree with consuming everything you can about sort of how the different clouds and different APIs work, and understanding all the different CI/CD tools that are used nowadays in the DevOps world. I think is a really interesting place to start. Everybody's got an API. All those APIs you can talk to a similar way, and I think that learning a lot of those things are what sit behind everything else. So the same way that learning SQL is super important if you're going to like understand how the internet works. I think that understanding APIs and how different programs communicate with APIs is probably really important.
Wonderful. All right, so hopefully you get some valuable input, insights from our panelists. We cover actually quite wide topics here. We talk about the concept, we talk about why we need a privileged access or identity management. We also cover some key consideration, challenge, and best practice, the industry trends, what's coming on the pipeline. And later we cover the talent development and the people development side. So before we wrap up our panel discussion, I'd like to ask our panel speakers, if you can only give one advice today to our audience about privileged identity, what do you want to say it? Only one. Not. I know there are so many things, right? But if you give a top one, what do you want to share with with our audience?
Don't reuse your passwords. Stop reusing your passwords. I know you're reusing your passwords. Stop it.
Until the day we don't need a password.
MFA. Straight up.
Multi-factor
MFA everything you can. Every single user account should be verifiable. You need to make sure the person who's connecting is who they say they are. So whatever form of MFA that you can get your hands on, use it. A lot of different solutions are available in Azure AD.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, I'd echo both of those comments. Again, we have so many passwords these days, and they're so hard to keep track of. And we need to make them as complex as possible if we continue to use them. So I would say if you're get a password keeper. If you do have passwords, then again, use multi-factor every chance you get.
All right, so password management. So, okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so for people online, thank you very much for joining today's session. We have Bryan from Microsoft, we have Brett from Delinea, and also Jim from RBC. They spend their valuable time come to share with us their years of insights. I'd like to ask everybody online, give them a virtual applause or virtual pat. So thank you very much for coming to share. And we really learn a lot, enjoy your insights. Thank you very much.